Yo, what's going on YouTube? And welcome back to Goal Line Hockey. It's your boy Kevin Forte. Guys, we're taking a look today at the New York Islanders off-season. Another year, another deep playoff run, but unfortunately, third place, doesn't lead you to the Stanley Cup. We'll be taking a look at the Islanders lineup today. We'll be looking at who may be coming back for the Islanders, who may not be coming back for the Islanders, predicting the roster for next year, and maybe some moves they make this offseason. We'll look at all of that in this video. If you guys like what we're doing here at Goal Line Hockey and want to see the latest news around the NHL and more videos just like this one, you guys know what to do. Well, make sure to give this video a big thumbs up and an even bigger subscribe down below. So let's take a look at the New York Islanders. So this team, let's remember, throughout the playoffs, the narrative was this team can't score enough goals. They don't have enough scoring depth. They don't have enough depth in general. Well, out of the four final teams that were left here in the Stanley Cup playoffs, between the New York Islanders, the Montreal Canadiens, the Vegas Golden Knights, and the Tampa Bay Lightning, the Islanders' bottom six had the most goals out of those four teams. So, lack of scoring depth, that may not be part of the problem. It comes down to more of the top guys getting it done. That was actually the issue for the Islanders. So, what we're looking at here, you've got the lines. Now, I've got the lines here for you guys. I have a picture of it for myself. I'll put it up in the video. It's going to look different than what we saw in the playoffs, because in the playoffs, there were some injuries, and there were guys that are now pending unrestricted free agents who are not considered part of the roster. So it does change things up a little bit. So the top line throughout the playoffs, we had Matt Barzal down the middle alongside Jordan Eberle and Leo Komarov. Yes, Leo Komarov was on the first line for the Islanders. Yikes. And he was scratched at various points throughout the regular season. Just shows you how, again, maybe lack of depth did hurt the Islanders in that situation. Now, honestly, I would have rather seen Kyle Palmieri alongside Barzal and Eberle. They did play quite well. Barzal actually got a couple of assists on Palmieri goals throughout this year's playoffs, but that's just not how it worked out. The second line, we saw Josh Bailey, Brock Nelson, and Kyle Palmieri. Now, sometimes we did see Anthony Beauvillier on that second line, so we'll go with that. We'll go with Beauvillier, who was on the second line alongside Bailey and centered by Brock Nelson. Now, going to the third line, obviously Jean-Gabriel Pageau centered that line. And I called this line the Devil's line because you look at his wingers, they were Travis Zajac, former Devil, and Kyle Palmieri, the two big additions the Islanders made at the trade deadline this past season. So that was the Islanders' third line. Now, mind you, again, both pending unrestricted free agents along the wing of Pageau. So that does account for what we're going to see potentially in the offseason. And then the fourth line, the identity line. I know a lot of people hated that term, but the identity line of the New York Islanders, of Matt Martin, Casey Cizikas down the middle, and Cal Clutterbuck. So we're going to see some changes to that definitely this offseason. Now, opening night roster, right? We're projecting the opening night roster for the New York Islanders. I'm going to have Anders Lee back in the lineup, who was out with an injury since before the trade deadline. So the Islanders were without Lee. He was a big loss for the Islanders. If we're going to be honest, a huge piece of that top six taken out, and it really hurt the Islanders in the playoffs this year. So Anders Lee returns. He's on the top line. Matt Barzal, no surprise, he's down the middle. And I hate this, but Jordan Eberle on the line alongside Barzal and Lee. Eberle did not have a great playoffs this year. And if I'm the New York Islanders, and if I'm Lou Lamoriello, I'm looking for a way to move out some cap space. Jordan Eberle may be a guy I actually look at, and we'll get more into that later on, but that is something to keep an eye on. Now, the second line, I have a void on the left side, and we'll get further into that, why that is, but down the middle, you've got Brock Nelson. He's your second line center, a really good second line center, in fact, and then you've got Josh Bailey on the wing. Again, another guy like Jordan Eberle, I wouldn't be completely shocked if Lou Lamoriello is looking to make moves this summer, move out some cap space. Those two guys, Eberle and Bailey, those are guys that you should really keep an eye on this summer. The third line, again, we've got another hole in there. We've got Komarov and Pageau on that third line. I don't even like Komarov on that third line. I'd rather see one of the young guys like Michael Dalcol or Kiefer Bellows in that spot. But again, we're just going off of this. Komarov and Pageau, and then another void on the right side. And then the fourth line, the identity line. A big piece of the identity line is a pending unrestricted free agent this summer. You got Matt Martin and Cal Clutterbuck on the wings once again. And Casey Cizikas is an unrestricted free agent this summer, which definitely complicates things in the bottom six for the Islanders. But the good news for the Islanders is they do have guys that can step into that role. And again, as we look at the depth chart for the Islanders, specifically their forwards, you will see there is a silver lining here. So now we've got the depth. All right, so you got Ross Johnson, the enforcer, the goon. We did not see him in the playoffs this year. I'm not exactly sure the reasoning for that, but he was not in the lineup for the Islanders. Okay, account for that. And again, he isn't a restricted free agent or pending unrestricted free agent. Unrestricted free agent in the summer of 2022. That's next summer. Oliver Wahlstrom. This is a guy I would like to see in the top six for the Islanders, potentially taking either Jordan Eberle, Josh Bailey spot on the second line, if not even filling that void on the second line alongside Bailey and Nelson. I would really like to see that from a guy potentially like Oliver Wahlstrom, who would add some scoring depth to the Islanders. And we saw in Game 7, you may have needed a guy like Wahlstrom in your top six. Now remember, Wahlstrom was sitting in the press box for Game 7 as the Islanders got shut out. That is something to keep in mind. That one definitely hurts still. And then we've got two restricted free agents. So basically what that means is you have two guys that, especially with Lou Lamoriello as the general manager, they aren't going to get these big money contracts. Lou Lamoriello is going to be very stringent with these guys. He has the leverage in terms of having their control. Any team can throw an offer sheet at these guys if they don't want to sign, but knowing Lou Lamoriello, that doesn't really faze him as any bit of a threat. And I think that's something that the Islanders, the agents for both Anthony Beauvillier and Michael Dal Cole, they do realize that, and they don't have much leverage. Anthony Beauvillier was a restricted free agent last summer, so again, he's in the same boat. I wonder if Anthony Beauvillier is even a guy the Islanders even look at leaving as unprotected going into the expansion draft for Seattle. And I hope they don't lose Bo. He scored the big goal in Game 6, the last game at Nassau Coliseum. But knowing Lou Lamoriello, he doesn't really care about that stuff, if we're going to be honest. He has loyalty to players, but for the right price. And I think that's something you should consider here with Anthony Beauvillier. We may have seen the last game of Beauvillier in the orange and blue. And Michael Dal Cole may be another guy that a team like Seattle looks at as maybe a guy, you know what? Maybe we're willing to take this guy, a power forward, a former top 5 overall draft pick. Maybe we can redevelop him in our organization. I think that would be the guy for a team like Seattle. If they don't get the opportunity at a guy like Beauvillier, that's another guy you should look at. You've also got Kyle Palmieri, Travis Zajac, and Casey Cizikas as the 3 pending unrestricted free agents in the Islanders depth chart. So Palmieri, I think we've heard a lot of rumors. He wants to go back to the New Jersey Devils. He was born in Smithtown on Long Island, but I don't know how much of an attachment he truly has to Long Island. He grew up in New Jersey, so I think he does go back to the New Jersey Devils. But again, he knows the situation with Lou Lamoriello. He has liked being with the Islanders, especially going to the conference finals this year, or the semis, whatever you want to call it. So maybe he does want to return for a cheaper deal. That's a guy where the Islanders talk about filling a role. He could be the guy in that top 6 for the New York Islanders in the fall, if he decides to return. And he'd be a heck of a lot cheaper than some of these other guys that we've looked at. Guys like maybe a Jake DeBrusk out of Boston, or a Connor Garland, who is a restricted free agent in Arizona. Those are the names. If the Islanders were to look for a top 6 guy outside the organization, they aren't going to come cheap. And they are going to cost you other assets as well. So that is something to keep in mind. Travis Zajac, he may come back to the Islanders. I don't really know, though, because for the price, the Islanders have a lot of depth centers in Bridgeport, specifically, that can jump into the lineup on their entry-level deals. And again, with the Islanders' limited $5 million of cap space, a tragedy of that may be a guy like Travis Zajac. Now, let's get on to Casey Cizikas. This is a guy, he was drafted by the New York Islanders, was playing with the Bridgeport Sound Tigers, and under Brent Thompson there in the American Hockey League, has developed under the New York Islanders brand, and he has been there through thick and thin with the New York Islanders. I remember him for as long as I've been an Islander fan. He has been in the Islanders system. or on the roster. So this one's tough for me. There is a little bit of sentimental value towards Cizikas. At times throughout this playoffs, you could argue that he was the Islanders' best player out there, or at the very least, their best forward. Yes, even over guys like Matt Barzal. So Cizikas, he seems like a guy that would fit in really well with Seattle. It sucks. It pains me to say that, but that may be, again, with the salary cap, he may be a tragedy of that for the Islanders. So now we're moving on. Let's take a look at the depth. The Islanders, guys in Bridgeport, guys that have been recently drafted. And there's a lot of names here that you've probably heard of before, some that you maybe haven't heard of. So we're going to look at some of those guys. So Simon Holmstrom, the 2019 first-round pick. A lot of people projected him to be a second or even a third-round pick selection in the 2019 draft. Lou Lamoriello definitely went off the board with that pick. Swedish forward, a lot of expectations for him, and he is not really living up to that. He had a really bad season this year with Bridgeport overseas. He really wasn't in one spot and didn't have a lot of consistency for his first year professionally. So that is one thing you could look at. It was an abnormal year and just a lot of change and a lot of things just happening all at once for a young Simon Holmstrom. That's the excuse we have, but if I'm going to be honest, I am quite concerned. Even on draft day, I was concerned about Simon Holmstrom, and it's looking even worse to this day. So we'll see what happens. Maybe another year in Bridgeport, a full year in Bridgeport, he develops a little bit more, but I am genuinely concerned about Holmstrom. All right, so a little bit more of a positive front. Reese Newkirk. Now, this is a guy that played in Bridgeport last season. And he played, I believe he did play in the juniors for a little while as well. This is a guy that the Islanders should definitely be excited for. Reese Newkirk could be the next Casey Cizikas. He has a lot of similarities in terms of his game, his two-way ability, and his ability to win puck battles and win faceoffs and stuff like that. This could be the guy that potentially replaces Casey Cizikas on that fourth line next season. Now, it does seem like a little bit of a long shot. Reese Newkirk is still very young, but this is a guy that could definitely be looking at potentially making the roster for the New York Islanders next fall. So keep an eye on Reese Newkirk. Blade Jenkins, he's going to be fighting for that same role on the bottom six for the New York Islanders. Again, another guy that he does put up points, but again, it's junior hockey, so that is something to consider. But that defensive mindset, he was actually playing on the top line for the Bridgeport Sound Tigers at points this season. So Blade Jenkins, he's starting to develop. This is very exciting. This is a guy that the Islanders are hoping could jump into the lineup again, maybe making a spot on the roster for the Islanders in the fall. Maybe taking a role from a guy like Komarov or a guy like Casey Cizikas, who may be leaving the team this offseason. Arnaud Durando. Now, this is a name that obviously you can't really forget the name. He's obviously been playing in the QMJHL. And this is a guy that, again, played in Bridgeport last season. He put up some really good numbers himself. So Arnaud Durando, again, I don't think he's going to make the roster out of camp next year. This is a guy where the Islanders, if they need, let's say guys like Kiefer Bellows and Michael Dalcol and Anthony Beauvillier leave the roster, maybe you look at a guy like Arnaud Durando. But again, I think he's got at least another year of development. But depending on how things work, maybe that development gets speed up. We'll see how that works. But keep an eye on him as well. There's a lot of excitement for him as well. Otto Koivula. We've been talking about Koivula for a long time. He's got a big frame, an Islanders draft pick. And he's been playing on the top line for the Bridgeport Sound Tigers now for the last 2 years at this point. Brent Johnson definitely believes in him as a guy that could make the next step to the New York Islanders next season. Now, alongside guys like Newkirk and Jenkins, he could be fighting for that bottom role in the bottom six as a center for that fourth line for the Islanders in the fall. Could he be a part of that identity line? I think it's definitely a possibility. He's a good penalty killer. He adds a little bit more size than a guy like Casey Cizikas, but his skating has held him back, and his offensive production at times has been very inconsistent in the AHL. But again, everything can change in the NHL. We've seen that happen to plenty of players. So Otto Koivula, definitely a guy that I'm hoping maybe makes the roster. I've talked about it for a while now. And now that there could be a hole in the bottom six at the center role, it seems like Otto Koivula could be that next guy. Now, again, if we know anything about Barry Trotz and Lou Lamoriello, they're not going to make it easy for these three young centers to potentially make the roster. I wouldn't be surprised if the Islanders bring in a depth guy via free agency on a cheap deal, or if they bring back a guy like Zajac just to push those guys to have to earn that spot and not necessarily just be given that role. So look out for that this summer for the Islanders. And then Kiefer Bellows. Kiefer Bellows, yeah. 2018 first round draft pick of the Islanders. He is just not developed. A lot like Kiefer Bellows when he was, a lot like Michael Dalcol when he was drafted. More of a power forward, scoring-esque player, but the skating just isn't there. The edge work isn't there. And let's be honest, the numbers aren't there either. The ability to score has been an issue for Kiefer Bellows. He struggled in Bridgeport last season. None of these guys develop with Brent Thompson. That's been a theme. We've seen any offensive potential in guys just doesn't work under Brent Thompson. Josh Hosang. That's kind of what we've seen. We're seeing it again here from Kiefer Bellows. Maybe he makes the Islanders out of camp. Again, another guy like Michael Dalcol and Anthony Beauvillier. I would not be surprised if he is considered to be fodder for the Seattle Kraken in the expansion draft. All right, we've gone through that. That is it for the forward core. But we're going to see a lot of change. Again, I think the big thing we're going to see is what are they going to do with Anthony Beauvillier and what are they going to do with their top six? And are we going to see them maybe make a move here, whether it's a guy like Jordan Eberle or Josh Bailey? We may see some change there. All right, so the defense is definitely going to see some change over the next couple of years. So what we saw in the playoffs from the Islanders, their defensive pairings were Adam Pelech, Ryan Pulock. That was your top pair. Nick Leddy and Scott Mayfield on the second pair. And then the third pairing was Andy Green and Noah Dobson. I definitely have my opinions about this blue line, but now we're starting to see some holes here this summer because of guys needing new contracts. So right on the top pairing, Adam Pelech is a restricted free agent this summer. Expect him to get paid some pretty good money this summer. Ryan Pulock, he still has one more year left on his contract, so we'll worry about that bridge next year. On the second pair, you've got Nick Leddy and Scott Mayfield. Leddy has one more year, just like Pulock on his deal, so that's next year's problem. And Scott Mayfield still has 2 years left on his deal. He won't be a free agent until the summer of 2024, so we don't have to worry about that. And then the third pairing, you have a hole. Andy Green is an unrestricted free agent. Now, I wouldn't be surprised if the Islanders bring him back in. Kind of like the center depth for the Islanders. Don't be surprised if there's guys maybe trying to nip at the heels of Andy Green for that defensive spot on the third pair alongside Noah Dobson. And Noah Dobson may even, by the end of the season, develop into that top four role for the Islanders as a second pairing defenseman. We saw a lot of strides from him. So now that we've gone over that, Ryan Pulock, he has a big season next year. He's going to be looking for a new contract, probably the big contract, and I would not be surprised if he has a really good season once again for the Islanders. We saw he was pretty prolific on the board in the postseason. He had 4 goals in the playoffs this year. So expect some good things from him. I'm expecting him to have a good year once again. Nick Leddy, same kind of thing. Expect a lot of offensive, prowess from a guy like him. He is kind of lives and breathes and kind of dies by his offensive ability, his ability to move the puck forward and create offense as a defenseman. Nick Leddy is definitely going to be looking for a pretty big season next year. Again, his defensive capabilities have made things a little bit interesting with Leddy, and we'll get into that. And then Scott Mayfield, he's had a good season, but again, Noah Dobson may be nipping at his heels on that right side as the second pairing D-man. So that is something to keep an eye on. All right, so now we're looking at the guys that really fill out that group. Adam Pelech, he's going to get his big contract, hopefully. He's been a really good defenseman for the Islanders. I would expect anywhere between a 5 and 6 year deal for Adam Pelech. It's a little bit risky for the Islanders. He has had that injury, which he had last year in the playoff bubble, which kept him out for significant time. It was, They were kicking the ball around in warm-ups, the soccer ball, and he messed up his foot or his knee. So that is something that Lou Lamoriello will definitely use as leverage in a contract, but that is something to keep an eye on in this deal. So expect to hear about some extension talk this summer. And then the other guys are Andy Green, Braden Coburn, I don't expect Braden Coburn to come back. He's probably going to retire. And I wouldn't be surprised if we hear the same thing from Andy Green. The Islanders may look for new blood in terms of their defense there. But the way Matt Barzal was talking about Andy Green and his impact on the locker room in the post-game for after Game 7, trying to forget about that. But Andy Green did have a significant impact on the Islanders in the locker room. So that does account for something. So you wonder if maybe he does return for one more season. And now we're looking at the depth. So Sebastian Aho has to be frustrated as hell. This is a guy that he's made the Islanders roster before. And then Lou Lamoriello and Barry Trotz come in, and he gets sent back down to Bridgeport and lost his role in the Islanders' top 6 as a defenseman. So expect Sebastian Aho to be frustrated, looking to make the roster for the Islanders in the fall. He will definitely be looking for that spot on the left side on the third pairing. But the question is now, what do the Islanders do? They may have a shakeup with their pairings, because do they want young Noah Dobson and another rookie defenseman on that third pairing? Probably looking for, a little bit more leadership and veteran-led on that. So maybe they switch Mayfield and Dobson. I don't know how that would work, but that is something you may see here, depending on who gets that role on the left side. So Sebastian Aho, expect some things there for him. Samuel Bolduc, I'm hoping for some good stuff from him. He's still projected to be a pretty good defenseman. He had a pretty good season last year in the QMJHL, so expect him to continue to develop. But again, I wouldn't be surprised if he goes back to the Q next season. Bodie Wild, really looking like a promising prospect, and the Islanders are hoping that he maybe nips at the heels for a spot in the top 6 for the Islanders defense next year, and I'm expecting some good things from this guy, and hopefully he gets in there. Mitch Van de Sample, we've been hearing here, he's been knocking at the door long enough. Kind of reminds me of Devon Tays. He definitely had his due time in the American Hockey League, and look what he developed into. Parker Witherspoon, his draft stock has definitely dropped a little bit, but there is still potential for Parker Witherspoon. Those three, really 3 or 4 guys, Aho, Wild, Van de Sample, and Witherspoon, will probably be looking at the Islanders, maybe fetching a spot in that third pair role for the Islanders next fall. So those are just some things to look at. And again, they're going to be a lot cheaper than bringing back an Andy Green or potentially trying to fetch someone in the free agency market, which the Islanders already have enough cap issues. You probably don't need to add another sinker contract, Thomas Hickey. All right, so moving on to goaltending. So we've got Semyon Varlamov and ... because Ilya Sorokin has to get another contract this summer. And again, it's one of those things where I'm a little bit concerned here, because is Sorokin looking for a 5, 6, maybe even 7-year deal here from the Islanders? And with the small sample size, again, we saw him split time in the playoffs. We saw him split time during the regular season. What is Ilya Sorokin? Is he a bona fide starter, or is he potentially that elite starter, which Sorokin and his agent will probably be looking for somewhere in the middle of that? And what is the gray area for that? Is it a long-term deal, or is it a short-term deal where maybe you have to prove yourself a little bit more? So that is something I'm very interested to see what the number looks like for Sorokin this summer. And the good news is, in the prospect, in the pipeline, eventually Semyon Varlamov is 33 or 34 years old right now. Jakub Skerik, a third-round pick by the Islanders back in the day. This is a guy who's played very well. This is a guy in Europe. He's done very well, and he's probably the heir to the throne here for potentially taking over Semyon Varlamov. We may see the Russian tandem of Jakub Skerik and Ilya Sorokin potentially as soon as 2023 or even 2024. So good stuff there for the Islanders. The goaltending future looks bright for the Islanders, which I can't believe I'm actually saying that with how bad the Islanders goaltending has been. Really since Billy Smith left the Islanders crease from the early 90s, late 80s. So good stuff there for the Islanders. So now we're getting into more of the cap side of things. So the Islanders cap space this summer is just a shade under $6 million in cap space. That probably just gets you one of a guy like Anthony Beauvillier or Casey Cizikas signed. And I'm not even talking about Ilya Sorokin. It probably gets you one of those guys re-signed. Everybody else, yeah, the Islanders are going to have to make some trades this summer, and I don't really know where you start, because you look at the dead cap space. it's pretty much $14 million for the Islanders between Thomas Hickey, who's making $2.5 million for the past 2 years to play with the Bridgeport Sound Tigers. Yikes. That contract will end in 2023. Yeah, no, there's no bright spot here. We're fucked with that contract. As well as Andrew Ladd, summer of 2023. $5.5 million per season. Yeah, it doesn't get much better. And then Johnny Boychuk making $6 million till the summer of 2023. That's $14 million of just dead cap for the Islanders. I don't know if Lou Lamoriello tried last offseason to try and unload those guys. Maybe Zach Parise, we see that deal somehow come to fruition. That would definitely be interesting. We heard about Bill Guerin and Lamoriello trying to make that move last offseason. Maybe they get rid of Ladd in that deal to bring in a guy like Parise, which that could be a concerning contract you're bringing in. Thomas Hickey, I don't know who's taking Thomas Hickey at 2.5. He's like a 73 overall defenseman in the NHL game. So who's taking him at 2.5? Probably nobody. Seattle. That's maybe your best hope, Islander fans. But again, you look at what happened. I mean, they actually got off pretty clean out of the teams from that whole Vegas situation where Vegas took, who did they take? John Gibson and what's his name? That Russian guy, Mikhail Grabovski. They took his $5 million deal, and they had to give up Christopher Gibson and who else? Oh, they gave up that young guy, Jake Bischoff. So, I mean, that ended up working out for the Islanders. That could have really blown up in their face if Jake Bischoff becomes a top 4 defenseman and Gibson becomes a starting goaltender. But thank goodness for the Islanders that didn't end up happening. I wonder if the Islanders try and unload one of Hickey, Boychuk, or Ladd's contracts to Seattle. They don't have their first round pick, so you wonder if it maybe cost them a guy like Jakub Skerek or Bodie Wild or even Parker Witherspoon. That could be something we see here, and that would be frustrating for the Islanders. But again, cap space is everything. And if the Islanders want to keep one of, two of, or three of guys like Sorokin, Cizikas, and Beauvillier, I didn't even mention Adam Pelech. You still have to re-sign Pelech as well. So, yeah, this is going to be a really tough spot for the Islanders. So we'll see what happens. I'm really interested to see what the Islanders do this summer because you're looking at a situation where you may have no choice but to move out a guy like Jordan Eberle or Casey Cizikas. You have to move out one of these really crappy contracts of Andrew Ladd, Thomas Hickey, or Johnny Boychuk. Do the Islanders consider moving on from Semyon Varlamov? I mean, his value has to be at the highest it's going to be right now. And at $5 million till 2024, you're running the risk here that the Islanders may have an issue there in terms of long term. Do you really want to be giving up potentially $10 or $11 million between Sorokin and Varlamov as soon as this fall? That seems like a lot of money. And with Jakub Skerek coming along, is that something the Islanders really want to put themselves into? But guys, let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. What do you think the New York Islanders should do this offseason? Listen, I laid it out for you guys in a half hour. There's a lot of depth going on here for the Islanders, but we'll see what happens. Guys, thank you so much for watching this video. If you like what we're doing here at Goal Line Hockey, want to see the latest news around the NHL, and more videos just like this one, make sure to give this video a big thumbs up and an even bigger subscribe down below. As always, guys, thank you so much for watching this video, and I will see you guys